background. This is the MS Express Samina. It was a RoPax ferry. More simply put, it is a roll-on, roll-off passenger carrying ferry. But its life didn't start out as the Express Samina. Instead, a few name changes and a country change would stand between the start of its life and the end of its life. It actually began working as the MS Course under the French flag. She was built at Chantiers de l'Atlantique, Saint-Nazaire, France, for the company called CGT. This first chapter would last from her birth in 1966 until 1982, where she sailed under 3 French operators, Compagnie Générale Transatlantique, Compagnie Générale Transméditerranéenne, and Société Nationale Maritime Course Méditerranée. I know I butchered all of that French pronunciation. Anywho's, from 1982, she would get her first name change to MS Golden Virginia under the control of the Stability Maritime Company. This change of name and company also coincided with the change of her flag to that of the country of Greece. 6 years later, she would be sold yet again in 1988 to the Agapitos brothers. She was pressed into service in the Aegean Sea. Her final sale and name change would happen in 1999, when ownership was taken up by the interestingly named company Menon Flying Dolphins, a Greek-based ferry company. Her name was then changed to her final iteration as the MS Express Samina, again tasked with sailing around the Aegean Sea. We are very close to the disaster in our story, but first we need to quickly talk about the ship's particulars. She had a length of 115 metres with a width of 18.1 metres and a draft of 4.36 metres, with the imperial units just listed here on screen. Her 2 engines powered her gross registered tonnage of 4,455 up to a top speed of 21 knots, 39 kilometres or 24 miles per hour. She had a capacity of 1,500 passengers and up to 170 vehicles, in which all of this was accommodated over 11 levels. She had fin stabilisers as well as an autopilot system, which aided in keeping the ship on a predetermined course or bearing without the need of human intervention, although often it is required that the system is under constant supervision. Her hull was subdivided by transverse bulkheads into 12 watertight compartments with 11 controlled watertight doors. She was relatively forgettable as a ship and was built to the standards of her time, although by the late 1990s she was getting long in the tooth, approaching 35 years old, which makes me feel very old being 36. But her remarkableness would end on the evening of the 26th of September 2000. Now it's time to move on to the next part of our video. The disaster. It is around 5:15 in the evening on the 26th of September 2000, and the MS Express Samina is about to leave the port of Piraeus, Greece. She has 473 passengers and 61 crew aboard. In addition to this, she also has 17 trucks and 34 cars. She is bound for the island of Paros on an overall journey that has stops at the aforementioned Paros, as well as Naxos, Ikera, Samos, Patmos and Lipsi. Her estimated time of arrival at the port of Paros is meant to be around 18 minutes past 10 p.m. But this would not be the case. At roughly 8 o'clock, the ship passed the Cape of Kephalos of Kifnos Island. Visibility was reported at the time to be around 7 to 10 nautical miles. In order to counteract the ship's bumping around on the sea, the crew deployed the stabiliser fins. However, unbeknownst to the crew, only the starboard stabiliser unfolded. At around the same time, the ship was placed into autopilot. With the predicted course, she should have happily sailed along this line. However, with just the starboard stabiliser deployed, she was actually being dragged off course towards starboard. This shouldn't have been too much of an issue, as it would have been picked up by the crew on the bridge. However, everyone had kind of buggered off, leaving the ship automatically cruising towards here. This was an islet around 3 nautical miles away from the entrance way to the port of Paros. At around 10 minutes past 10, a member of crew had actually checked the course on the MS Express Samina and realised that they were heading to a very, very bad destination. They attempted to change the course, but at this point it was far too late. At 12 minutes past 10, the ship hit the reef of Portus Islets on her starboard side. The collision caused 3 raking damages to the ship at both below and above the waterline. The largest gash was 6 meters long above the waterline, and also the crash caused severe damage to her starboard stabilizer, ripping it from the hull. The ship carried on its bearing, but just 3 minutes after impact she was beginning to list by 5 degrees to starboard. Water was pouring in along a 3-meter gash below the waterline. This was where the stabilizer once was on the starboard side. It was also where the engine room was, and this was not very good. Initially, none of the passengers on board really knew what was going on, but it would be hard to ignore as by 25 minutes past 10, the ship was listing 14 degrees. This then allowed water into the 6-meter gash that was originally above the waterline. Needless to say, this then further accentuated the list. A distress call was sent out, and it was picked up by a nearby NATO exercise fleet. The ship's power supply subsequently failed, plunging the decks into darkness. As the ship continued to list, only 3 of its 8 lifeboats aboard were able to be dispatched. At roughly 32 minutes past 10, she had listed 33 degrees. 18 minutes later, at 10 minutes to 11 p.m, the ship was lying on her side. Many had to jump into the water wearing life jackets. During the sinking, complete chaos had hit all those aboard. The crew started jumping off the ship themselves, leaving passengers to fend for themselves. This would contribute to the death toll later on. The first responders were made up of Royal Navy and Greek Port Authorities vessels, as stated by a BBC report. A helicopter from the aircraft HMS Invincible, which was exercising near Paros, rescued 12 survivors who were stranded on a rock, 2 of them suffering from hypothermia. HMS Liverpool, HMS Cumberland and RFA Fort George also joined the Greek military, local fishing boats, pleasure craft and the Coast Guard vessels in the huge rescue effort. Many survivors were stuck clinging to rock protruding from the sea. By the time 11 p.m. had come around, the ship was fully submerged. From start to finish, she had fully sunk in just under an hour. The sinking caused the death of 80 passengers. Interestingly, in addition to this death toll, one other person is attributed to the disaster. They were in Paros at the time of the accident. They had died of a heart attack. This was the port officer on duty. Likely, his demise was brought on from the stress of the disaster unfolding in front of him. The MS Express Samina sank to the very bottom of the ocean, where she is still to this day. Almost soon as the waves calmed and her battered body settled amongst the fishes, divers were sent down to the wreckage. This was in preparation for the investigation. Officially sanctioned divers were sent down to the wreckage and video was shot and important locations of the vessel were noted. However, it was also said that before this happened, some unknown divers went down to the wreckage. This leads us on to the next part of our story. The investigation and aftermath. In January 2001, the Court of Appeal for the Aegean Sea appointed a 5-member committee to investigate the cause of the sinking of the MS Express Samina. Their report was released a day before the first anniversary of the accident. During the investigation, the crew came under extreme scrutiny. The captain and mate were arrested and charged with manslaughter due to, as stated by a tourist guide website named Greek Island Hopping, allegations that at the time of the collision, the crew had left the bridge to watch a replay on one of the ship's TVs of a goal in an important local soccer match. The results from the report resulted in charges against 17 persons. This included ship's crew, Coast Guard and shipping company officers. But put a pin in that for later on. But although the crash was the result of clear negligence in the ship's navigation, another investigation would be launched to find out the reason why she sank, as it was fairly thought that the extent of her damage shouldn't have resulted in a rapid lack of buoyancy. The investigation was called Investigation into the Sinking of the Ro-Ro Passenger Ferry Express Samina by A. Papin Ikalau et al. This would delve into the mechanics of the sinking, especially when she probably shouldn't have with the damage she had sustained. She had watertight compartments after all. However, it was found that 9 of her 11 watertight doors hadn't been sealed off. The crew had often sailed with the doors open instead of closed. For example, in proper operation, the doors should always be shut and only open to allow access, after which they should be closed immediately. The crew had left them open and was planned to close them from the ship's main panel after any incident. However, due to the collision happening in the engine room, remote control was lost during the power loss. This then relied on the crew going to close the doors individually locally, which clearly didn't happen. The sinking was solely down to the fact the doors were left open, which of course was ultimately down to the incompetence of the crew. Now, the legal ramifications were pretty bad for the indicted persons. One would avoid criminal proceedings though, via using a less than ideal trick, as on the 29th of October 2000, the manager of Minoan Flying Dolphins decided on not being alive anymore via the help of gravity out of a 6-story window. The ship's officer would be found guilty of criminal negligence and was sentenced to 19 years, while the captain received a 16-year sentence. 3 other members of crew were handed down much lighter sentences ranging from 15 months to 1.5 years. In the aftermath, Griefs would put on a limit of 30 years for service life of vessels in the country's fleet, although this would be relaxed with the provision of following strict safety standards. Interestingly, Minoan Flying Dolphins, the ship's owner, was planning on going public with a stock offering around the same time of the crash, but understandably they walked back this plan. Interestingly, the company is still in operation today, albeit under the name Hellenic Seaways. So that's my video on the MS Express Samina sinking. It's going to be a 5 on my scale, and this is what I've got for my root cause analysis card. Do you agree? Let me know in the comments below. This is a Plain Default production. All videos on the channel are Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike licensed. Plain Default videos produced by me, John, in the currently very warm corner of southern London, UK. And all I have to say is thank you very much for watching, and Mr. Music, can you play us out please?